Hey guys, so today we'll be going through the third pillar of object-oriented programming, which is inheritance. And we'll be going through a live example of how you can apply this, the concept of inheritance to your X++ coding. And if you're new here, I have already created two videos on the topic of object-oriented programming, already on encapsulation and abstraction. So if you haven't seen it, please go and check those out now. But going back to inheritance, let's get straight into it. So you can see here, if you watched my previous videos, you'd know that we talked about a person class. So I have stripped down the person class to be a little bit more straightforward. So you've got a person which has a private variable name. You can initialize that object, passing in the name variable, and you can also return the name of the object. So a very straightforward class called person. But a really good way of demonstrating the concept of inheritance is introducing another class, right? Because the whole point of inheritance is that you can have multiple objects that share a lot of the same characteristics and variables, but there might be a few differences, right? And so a person and a student is a great example of this, because a student is always a person, right? But there's slight differences in a student, in the sense that a student is always the student will always, for example, have a name or a surname, and other details that a person is going to have. But there's some characteristics which are unique to the student. So the student will, for example, have a student ID. But the whole point of inheritance is that you don't have to duplicate your code from the parent class and recreate it in the student class, because all of that information is already held in the person class. So let's look at this example, right? So we have you saw the person class earlier, right? So now we've created a student class, which, here's a key part, it extends the person class. And within the student class, we have a private variable called student ID. And then we have a public new constructor to initialize the student class with the student name and the student ID. And what we can do here is, inside the new class, we can call super. So when we say super, we're calling the new method in the parent class, and the parent class in our case is person. And you can see this by double clicking new, go to definition, and you'll see you've jumped to the person class, straight to the new method, and this is a class that you'll be calling when you run this piece of code, super. All right, so let me do that again. So if I go to super, go to definition, you'll see it jumps straight to the new class, so new method. And then because we're now referencing that new method within the parent class, we also have to pass in the parameter that it needs, which is the student name, right? So let's go back into into the super, go back to the new method within the person, and you'll see that it needs a person name, right? That's why we need to pass in the student name, which we get in this case from the new method, where we have student name as the variable that we're passing in, parameter, sorry, that we're passing in. And then we're also passing an ID, which is where we are initializing that student ID with the ID that we're passing in to the new class, so to the new method. And then we have a very straightforward public method where we can get the student ID, and that simply just returns the student ID variable. So let's see this in action, right? So if we go to the runnable class I've created called create student, so what we're doing here, very quickly running through this, we've got a class where we can create a student, and we create a variable student of type student. That's the new child class that we've created. And in order to create that student object, we need to call the new method, pass in the name, the two variables. So right, you've got John, and then you've got the student ID as the two variables you need. So that creates the student object. And then we want to print out the student's name, ID, a wallet balance we don't need anymore, because that's from my previous tutorial, right? So all we're caring about here is let's get the name and the student ID. So when I run this, you'll see the concept of inheritance in action. So I'm going to hit start to run this. Hopefully it won't take too long.
The next day.
Okay, so as you can see, the class is running now, and what I should do is hit one of my breakpoints. So let's minimize this, and there you go, the first breakpoint is hit. And the first thing it's going to do is print out the student's name by going into the student.getName method. So if I hit F11, what you'll see though, right, is even though we're saying student.getName, you'll notice that of course we don't have a getName method in the student class, right? Because the only method we have to get something is the student ID. But this is where inheritance comes into place. Because we've extended person, and the person class has a method called getName, it knows that that's the method it needs to go to, that's the place it needs to go to get the name, right? And that's where you have the concept of inheritance, where you haven't had to repeat the getName method within the student class. You know it's in the parent class, so you can leave it there and you can just refer to it. And so in the runnable object here, we're just saying student.getName, and therefore it knows it needs to go to the person object to get the name, right? And then we'll go on to the next part, which is we want to get the student ID. Hit continue. So now we're at student ID, so we hit F11. And student ID, get student ID, is a method within the student class, right? So that's straightforward. It knows there's a method in there and it goes straight to that one. And then we can just hit play, continue, run through this. But that's essentially it, right? We've demonstrated the concept of inheritance, whereby we haven't had to duplicate all our code in the student class, because we know a lot of it is all present in the parent class, right? And so by doing this, we're keeping our code cleaner and trimmer, and we're reusing code that already exists. So that's the whole point of inheritance. So hopefully that makes sense. And thanks for watching. And we're nearing the end of this series, because the next topic I'll be talking about is the fourth pillar of object-oriented programming, which is polymorphism. So I'll catch you there. Thanks.